What's the most unethical thing you've experienced in your career? I'll never forget this case of a 98-year-old patient who had a living will written when he was in his late 80s, stating that he would never want to be artificially kept alive with feeding tubes or a respirator. Flash forward to present, his dementia has progressed to the point where he is nonverbal and barely moves. His daughter has put a feeding tube in him and has insisted he get intubated for his pneumonia/respiratory failure. I find his living will and am outraged, trying to advocate for this man who can no longer speak, who once had wishes that he wrote down that are no longer being recognized. The daughter pushes for us to do everything because she knows him better and thinks his living will is not what he really wanted. And most doctors thus far had allowed her to drive the ship. It's a case that still bothers me every time I dwell on it.
It's a tough situation. The contrast between the patient's wishes and the daughter's decisions is significant. It's frustrating to see someone's wishes overlooked due to family dynamics. It raises important questions about autonomy and care at the end of life. That case really highlights the ethical challenges in healthcare.
Co-workers who have worked a double, going 16 hours without changing a patient simply because they're weird or they're mean. It doesn't matter. That is subjecting them to infection, discomfort, and humiliation, at the very least, for not being changed into new briefs and clothes when they've soiled themselves. Edit. Many people are seeming to think this means I have not reported my co-workers / did not know I was legally bound to report them. Please rest assured that I know it is my legal responsibility and that I have reported said co-workers, smiley face.
It's tough to see people neglecting their duties like that. It's really not okay to leave patients in those conditions. Everyone deserves proper care. Glad to know you took the right steps to report it. Sounds like it was needed.
Not me personally, but my husband is a high school football coach. The school he coaches for has a pretty good football program and they normally have a few kids earn college scholarships each year. My husband discovered pretty early on that parents will do almost anything to make sure their son starts. This includes sexual favors, doing yard work, most people have a lot of land, cash bribes, etc. My husband was offered money and when he reported it to the athletic director, he was told, "I hear nothing, I see nothing." My husband discovered a few coaches take people up on their offers. It just seemed very wrong to me. The parents are wrong for offering, but the coaches shouldn't accept. Another coach told my husband that a lot of the dads are cool with their wives offering sexual favors as long as their son starts. It's gross.
This situation is pretty messed up. Parents pushing that hard for their kids to play is one thing, but crossing lines like that is something else. It's tough seeing that kind of mentality around youth sports, especially when it affects the kids and the integrity of the program. The whole thing just feels wrong.
Throwaway. I teach 3rd grade. The principal's son is in my class. Before the year started, the principal finagled all of the class lists so her son's friends would be with him in my class. These kids were not supposed to be together at all. Then she would show her son the class lists to make sure that he was okay with the list. There was one kid he really wanted in my class with him he was friends with. The principal contacted his mother and told her to request me, so they could be together. Ended up not working out after the 2nd grade teachers said absolutely not.
It sounds like there's a lot of politics going on with those class lists. The principal is definitely prioritizing her son and his friends over what might be best for the class overall. It's interesting how much influence she has in getting what she wants. That can create some complications for the teacher though. Hopefully, things settle down for you and the students after all this.
Video game journalist. Because most of us are freelance, we regularly file invoices with the hope that a publication will follow through on our contracts and pay on time. This does not always happen. One of my favorite publications let go freelancers recently, and I'm still owed $300 plus dating as far back as September. My contract states payment must arrive 30 days after filing an invoice. It's been 120 and 90 days between my 2 invoices. It's not just wrong to writers, it's breaking our contracts. Seriously messed up priorities there.
This situation highlights a common issue in freelance work. Not getting paid on time can be frustrating, especially when contracts are in place. It puts a lot of stress on writers who rely on these payments. The inconsistencies in payment practices affect trust and ongoing relationships. It's a reminder of the challenges in the industry. Keeping up with invoices shouldn't feel like a gamble.
I have dealt with it all. The worst is when I was told to fudge some numbers for a report that was going to be public. I refused and resigned. I told HR about it in the exit interview. I was in a hard place at work. If I reported it then I was going to catch hell, if I did it then my personal integrity went out the window. I don't want to work for any company that does anything that requires me to jeopardize my integrity or personal reputation. In my years of experience it's better to find another job. If you blow the whistle and stay at the company there are repercussions no matter how much they assure you that you will be protected.
It sounds like you faced a tough decision. Choosing integrity over a job is not easy, but it's important. Companies can pressure you to compromise your values, and the aftermath can be hard to navigate. You made the right call for your own reputation. Finding a better job that aligns with your principles seems like a smart move. It's clear you value honesty in the workplace.
The last 2 tours I ever did as a musician, our guitarist was a money-grubbing prick. We did 6 weeks in Europe, and when I was told about the gig he expected us each to earn $300 per WK, which was quite good for this band honestly. It turned into $500 for the entire tour, plus our €10 per DMs every day. Oh, and then it turned into I was the only member of the band he couldn't afford to pay. Then he duped me into paying, as usual, out of pocket to fly out to NYC to practice for the next tour, which was 10 days in the US and Canada, and a week in Japan, saying he'd pay me back everything he owed me on the road. Also he had some unspoken beef with me the last 3 weeks in Europe, and avoided communicating with me almost entirely between the end of it and the beginning of the next tour. Turns out he never intended on paying me back at all, as we get to 7 days in, and it starts getting heated. I finally approach him in person to square it away, and he tells me he's not interested in talking to me in person and he'll just email me instead. I tell him either pay me what you owe me in full after the show tonight, or I'm flying home tomorrow. He made the excuse that the band doesn't have any money, so fly home I did, and I've stopped doing music ever since.
Dealing with someone who takes advantage of you like that can really mess things up. I get why you decide to walk away from music after an experience like that. It's hard when there's no trust in a team, especially when you're working hard for something you care about. Better to cut ties than stay in a toxic environment. Hope you're doing okay now.
Can't really say it was a career, but worked for a man who wouldn't hire a young woman because she's 23, she might have a baby in the next 5 years, I don't want to deal with maternity leave. He also wrote his children into the books as cleaners so they would meet work requirements to qualify for government payments. I cleaned that building every day and never qualified for benefits. He drove a BMW. Also, once he asked me why I had walked down a different street to work, apparently watching me through the window. I told him I'd visited my boyfriend the night before. He was silent for a moment or two then said, "You know you're going to hell, right?" I was too young and dumb to realize just how unethical it was. If I had my time again I'd report him for fraud. I never got my damn government benefits.
The guy seems really shady, using his kids as a cover for benefits while treating you unfairly. It's wild how people justify their actions like that. The comment about hell adds another level of creepiness. Reporting someone like that would send a message for sure. It's frustrating you didn't get what you deserved.
I was given housing on company property as part of my compensation package. When I gave notice of my resignation, they decided that I needed to vacate my apartment immediately, as in, pack up as much of your stuff as possible at 9 p.m., get out now, and come get the rest later. This was totally unexpected because I'd given a lot to this company and the real kicker it was a non-profit dedicated to ending homelessness. I got a hotel that night and was hoping to work something out with them until I could find a new place to live, but they wouldn't budge. When I said I would be hiring an attorney, they said they'd start spreading rumors about both me and my who was affiliate with our organization, and they'd make sure that so much damage was done that neither of us would be able to show our faces in the community again. At that point, I was scheduled to get both my regular paycheck and biannual performance bonus the next week. Once my unused PTO was calculated in, I was due over $10,000, which I needed because I had just given up my job without the 30 days I thought I was going to have to find a new job and was made unexpectedly homeless. They ended up taking 4 months to pay me, deliberately delaying it for no good reason and not returning my calls. I think they would have delayed it longer, but I started calling their grant makers one by one and exposing their behavior. It was all I could do. At that point, my savings were all but gone and I could barely meet my basic needs, let alone hire an attorney. No one would take my case pro bono or collect money upon collection. This is just the icing on their unethical cake, too. There was a lot I saw in my time there, but I had my head in the sand.
It's surprising how companies can treat people, especially when they claim to stand for a good cause. It's unfortunate you had to resort to contacting their grandmakers to get some action. It's frustrating to see such unethical behavior, especially after putting in hard work. You did what you had to do to try and make it right.
I have worked for 8 years in my previous job. I can safely say that they trusted me to listen and participate with their meetings and all, even though I am not in any position. My employer asked me once to look for new employees, and I recommended my friend. I didn't told them that he's a good friend of mine. After passing with flying colors in the interview, my employer pulled me on the side and said, "He's more than qualified and I really like him to be part of the team, but he's black." My friend didn't end up getting the job and handed in my resignation letter day after. We're in Canada BTW.
That's a tough situation. It sounds like you were put in an unfair spot. It's disappointing when biases come into play, especially in a professional setting. That's a hard call to make, resigning like that. It shows your loyalty to your friend, but leaving a job after so long must have been difficult. Hopefully, you find something better that aligns with your values.
I found out that one employer I worked for had been selling a product which didn't actually work. A product that his customers, who were small businesses, relied on to back up their data in the event of data loss. The employer had been selling this product which didn't work for 10 years. Over the last couple of years, he stopped selling it directly and started selling it as a service via computer stores all throughout the state. To the point where a majority of such stores selling this service in the state were all selling the same back end, but branded with the store's logo and name. Which meant that when a customer business had all their data disappear, which they only found out about when they needed to restore something after a disaster, they often fired their local computer store as a backup provider and went down the street to the next computer store and their backup service, which used exactly the same failure-prone back end. By the time I left, they had a couple of thousand customers, the vast majority of whom never knew they were actually using this particular service, and had a corresponding trail of failures and disasters, of other people's businesses, of course. They're still operating today.
That sounds pretty messed up. Selling something unreliable for that long is just wrong. It's wild how many small businesses were affected without knowing it. They trusted the service to keep their data safe, and it turns out it was just a setup for failure. It's frustrating to think about the impact this had on those companies. The employer still operating now is surprising.
My company was hired to, among other things, write a report about whether or not a government building's new windows and roof are up to code. Not sure why they wouldn't be or why it wasn't checked before they installed them. Turns out the windows weren't. I noted it in my report. The PM from the architect of the Capitol cornered me one day to talk about the report. He said the windows were a big deal and asked me to change the report. I refused. I did edit the report to basically say the impact was negligible.
Sounds like a tough spot. It's interesting how some things get overlooked until they're brought to light. The pressure to change a report can be tricky, especially when it's a matter of safety or code compliance. Editing to minimize the impact is a common move, but it raises questions about integrity.
Had an engineering scholarship with a company with multiple manufacturing sites around my country. For context, I'm female. Had a couple of days touring head office and some local sites, before I sat down with the national engineering manager and an HR person to talk about internships. To quote the HR person, "Well, we could send you to interesting site close to where my parents live, but it's a very male-dominated environment, so I don't think we will." There was other sexist shit coming from HR, but that was the kicker.
That sounds pretty frustrating. It's disappointing to see these attitudes still around, especially in a professional setting. It's important for companies to recognize talent regardless of gender. Hopefully, experiences like this will lead to some change over time.
Blackjack dealer. Coworker fails a drug test hard. Wasn't a bad employee, just really likes the hard stuff. Should have been fired on the spot, got 3 to 4 days suspension, told he would be randomly tested for 6 months, wasn't. Security officer starts a fight with a guest over a personal beef, clearly swung first, surveillance officer backs him, says the guest was the aggressor. Maintenance guy is creeping on a bartender's girl, cocktail server. Bartender's buddy is head of maintenance, has the guy fired for unauthorized overtime. The graveyard cook at our 24-hour place gives me free meals every time I go in there cause we're friends and fucks with people's food he doesn't like. I could go on. It never ends with this place.
Sounds like a chaotic work environment. The drug test situation is pretty telling about how things get handled there. It's strange how some people get away with stuff, while others face consequences. The tensions between coworkers and the maintenance guys' issues seem to add to the mess. It's interesting that you have a good relationship with the cook, though. Overall, seems like a lot goes on behind the scenes.
I'm a physicist. A group of people, including myself, were in the process of publishing a paper which, in part, refuted the conclusions in a previous paper of a very high-ranking scientist at the lab we work at. He caught wind of this. How? Because I innocently called him up and asked him for a digital copy of the, already published, data that he had used. In passing, I mentioned the thrust of the paper we were preparing. I didn't get the data. He very matter-of-factly told me that if we published our conclusion, he would make sure none of us ever received a single dime of funding ever again. We removed that part of the paper.
It's tough dealing with power dynamics like that, especially in academia. It's disappointing when the pursuit of knowledge clashes with funding and career threats. I guess prioritizing the paper over the funding was a necessary choice in the moment. It shows how complicated the environment can be when influential figures are involved. Sometimes, you just have to adapt to survive in those settings.
The new manager, who took over my place of work after literally everyone in the bar got fired for thousands of dollars in liquor and beer missing, told me to pour the really cheap liquor into the top shelf bottles. He said it was to save money. I refused, as this kind of action can actually send you to prison in Texas. He hated me after that and wrote me up for the dumbest reasons. I had been with the company for years and trained every single person, including the new manager. He finally fired me and replaced me with a girl who literally didn't know the difference between lemons and limes. As a bartender, this is pretty important.
Sounds like a rough situation. It's messed up when someone tries to cut corners like that, especially in a job that demands integrity. You did the right thing by refusing. It's frustrating to see someone less qualified take your place, especially after all your hard work. Hopefully, this experience leads you to better opportunities where your skills are valued.
When I was a door-to-door salesman for Verizon, I was able to sell a full TV, internet, phone package to a blind woman on a fixed income. I was training at the time, and really needed a job, so there was a supervisor from the company to watch over and make sure I did everything right, but not interfere with my sales. I kept talking to the old woman about how good it would be for her grandchildren to have TV and internet in the home for when they visited. She agreed and signed for it, talking about how she'll just have to ask her daughter to help with coupons to afford it, but since it was for her grandkids it would be worth it. I walked out feeling awful about myself. I still feel terrible that I convinced a sweet old lady to buy my shitty service. I quit a week after that.
That's a pretty tough situation. It sounds like you were just trying to do your job, but it weighed on you a lot. Selling something that might not really benefit someone, especially under those circumstances, can feel wrong. It's good that you recognized how it made you feel and decided to step away. Not every job suits everyone, and it's okay to choose not to continue with something that doesn't sit right.